The current U.S. policy towards Africa is encapsulated in President Obama's 2012 strategy for Africa, which states that Africa is more important than ever for the prosperity and security of the world and of the United States in particular. It's a recognition that increasingly the economic dynamism of this continent is a positive force in the world, that the political importance of this continent is growing, and there are still some security challenges which also concern the international community. Now, this may seem very obvious, but we have to remember not too long ago, when I was beginning my career, in 1995, at that time, under President Clinton at one point, the US Department of Defense issued a document which said that the United States does not have very many strategic interests in Africa. In the year 2000, President George W. Bush, while he was still a candidate for the presidency, gave an interview in which he said he didn't see very many core national interests in Africa. And yet it was that same President Bush who ramped up considerably foreign assistance to Africa, economic engagement, political engagement, security cooperation, and ultimately his successor who has expanded that. So we see in US policy for Africa a recognition of the importance of this emerging continent, and also, ironically, a bit of continuity between different political parties. On security, the US policy towards Africa is led in military security terms by the US Africa Command. This is a regional command grouping the entire continent together, based in Stuttgart, Germany, which covers the entire continent. It was created by President Bush in 2007. And recently, a new commander, the fourth in the series, was recently confirmed by the US Senate. On the diplomatic front, of course, the US State Department leads the command, and the US has more embassies and diplomatic missions in Africa than any other country. So it gives an idea of the level of that engagement. Foreign assistance, although the levels are not at such that people like me may be happy with, it's worth noting that under President George W. Bush, foreign assistance to Africa quadrupled. And under President Obama, although he did not dramatically increase it, during a period when, because of fiscal issues back at home in the United States, foreign assistance to every other region of the world was cut back significantly, sometimes 20–25%. Foreign assistance to Africa remained at the same real values that President Bush left behind. So still very high by American standards. And this includes programs from PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Fund Program for AIDS relief, to funding for malaria and tuberculosis, to the Millennium Challenge Fund, which gives large block grants to countries who meet certain indicators for good governance to build large infrastructure projects. And most probably importantly, far exceeding government programs has been the increase in American direct investment private companies. The United States is the single largest source of foreign direct investment in Africa by nation state. The larger than the next two partners, Great Britain and France, and well ahead of China, although China trades more with Africa. Well, there is an overall strategy for Africa as a whole, just as Africans themselves unite together in a Pan-African sense. But the United States also engages countries bilaterally. In fact, the United States has more resident diplomatic missions in Africa than any other country. So that's the importance of the bilateral country-to-country, state-to-state relationship. But increasingly, we recognize, even as Africans have recognized, that regional economic communities are very important, because that's the only way to capture economies of scale, large enough markets to be attractive to foreign direct investment. So the U.S. increasingly, it's not perfect yet, it's certainly a long way to go, but increasingly is also directing its cooperation toward regional blocks, recognizing places like East Africa, where the East Africa community is building intrastate commerce and markets together, that this will be much more sustainable and much more attractive to foreign direct investment. What will be likely in any transition? Well, there'll be some change certainly in the individuals responsible for day-to-day policy administration because of a new administration coming in, and perhaps a difference in accent. But what has been remarkably true is between American administrations, there's been a large continuity on policy in Africa. For example, the largest program of involving trade with Africa under the African Growth and Opportunity Act was originally passed as legislation under President Clinton. It was renewed and expanded under President Bush, and last year was expanded once more and extended under President Obama. So large continuity. I previously mentioned foreign assistance. President Bush quadrupled it, President Obama has protected it. So one expects a large continuity. There'll be certain discontinuities in certain accents, but overall I think the trajectory, because of America's security interests, our political interests, and our economic interests, remain relatively constant, that one can expect a high degree of continuity even if accents change.